All right, time for a new lab. Let's talk about it. This one is about loops. So it will include the graphing calculator example program. So let's see here. The starter code contains two files for this lab. So it's draw triangle and graphingcalc.cpp. I highly encourage you to do the triangle one first. All right, so for this first program, I want you to draw not a left-leaning right triangle like I did in class, but this one is leaning to the right, a right-leaning right triangle. I hope you see it. It's like it's tilting towards the right there. It's fallen to the right. And yeah, you're going to do it out of stars, but it will take some spaces as well. So the name of the game is like you ask the user for how big of a triangle they want, and then you build that kind of right-leaning right triangle for them, okay? And so to get over, like for the first line for a size 5 triangle, you have to print a few stars, right? Try to think about how many spaces, you have to print a few spaces. You have to print a few spaces before the star. You have to print a few spaces before these 2 stars. Do you see how many you need and how it might change depending on which line you're on? So that's that code. Draw a triangle. Yeah, so usually the user is going to give you some normal numbers, but you got some spaces that you have to worry about before the stars. And then if the user ever gives you a bad number, like -1 or something, let's see. I guess I don't say that here, but it's part of the rules. If the user ever gives you a bad size, like draw me a -1 size triangle or something, then I want you to print out invalid size. I already did that. And then also exit the program, all right? You remember how to do that. You got 2 options. You can use either the exit function from one of our libraries that we've talked about, or you can just like return here, okay? So like you want to stop the program. Don't attempt to draw a triangle if the size was less than 0. Only if it was a normal size you're ready to print your triangle now, okay? So yeah, it's just like given the size that you were given, print that triangle. I guess a size 0 triangle counts. It's just nothing, right? Size 1 triangle looks like that, size 2 triangle looks like that, all the way to 5 and 8, and whatever the user wants, okay? So it should all be the same after this. Your code should work for any one of those numbers that are just not negative, at least. And my hint to you to get this working is try to think about, like, what is the total spaces plus total stars on each line? Like, think about that. What is this number? All right, for each line, is that something special that you could think about and use that to your advantage? Then you might be able to like solve that equation, and that will give you what you need. Okay, so yeah, it's some spaces before the stars, and it's a triangle, a right triangle. That's the first part of your lab. The next part of your lab is the graphing calculator program. So I've given you a lot. All right, so here, let me just show you the code first. I've given you a lot already. What we're going to do is we're going to ask the user for which graph they want. I've given them 3 options total. Option 0 is this graph, option 1 is this graph, and option 2 is this graph. So based on what they want, it's your job to draw that particular graph for the user. Okay, but I've given you the bulk of the code already. I've given you the setup for the window, and the X and Y is all centered and everything now. You're just going to go and look back to my circle example and extrapolate. Okay, so here's what it should look like when you finish. It's really, really cool. All right, so you're going to draw the axes as well as the graph. So if the user asks for choice 0, choice 0 means graph this guy. Choice 1 means graph this guy. Choice 2 means graph this equation. And yeah, this is what choice 0 should look like once you get it working. Isn't that beautiful? That's really cool. You got the axes as well as the graph. And then here's choice 1, it's a cubic function. And then choice 2 is a sine wave. So this is what it should look like when you get it working. Isn't that pretty? I think it's really cool. It's a very satisfying lab to get working. All right, but here's the bulk of the work. It's in here. It's like you've picked an X and Y coordinate. Now it's your job. Like you've got an XY coordinate. It's your job to figure out, like, is it on the graph? Is it empty space? Is it an axis? Or is it the axes meeting? So that one's a plus sign rather than like a line or something, right? It's a plus sign for the axes meeting. But yeah, that's your job now. So you just want to, like, given your choice, given whatever the user gave you, you want to graph that graph, all right? See if it's on there, all right? So check if the current coordinate is in the graph that the user wanted. Make sure to use round like I was doing in class, okay, before checking for equality, so that you can guarantee that there's always going to be a corresponding y for every x, okay? So all these functions are solved for in terms of y already, so you're good there. You don't have to do any weird stuff like plus or minus square roots like the example from class was. But yeah, so if the user, for example, if they chose option 0, that's this graph, then you better be checking, like, if rounding this, right, rounding that equals y. Okay, that's how you know it's a point to be plotted. Okay, so that takes priority over everything. If your xy coordinate right now is a point on the graph, then you better print a star. All right, that takes priority over the axes as well. So like the sine graph, the star takes priority over the axes meeting. And then otherwise, it must be one of these, right? So if you didn't hit a point on the graph, then maybe it's still something cool. Either maybe it's like a vertical axis line. It's like one of these guys when x is 0. Whee! One of those lines there. Or maybe it's a horizontal axis line if y is 0. You want to print it that way if it wasn't already on the graph. And if the axes are meeting, though, if they're both 0, x is 0 and y is 0, and it wasn't on the graph, then I want to see a plus, because that should show the axes meeting, just like a bullseye there. That's perfect. Okay? But if none of that's true, if it wasn't on the graph, it wasn't part of an axis, then print an empty space so that you can just like move along and get ready for the next piece of this line that the next coordinate may be part of the graph. Who knows? So that is the code, and that's what it should look like. Don't forget your new line after a row of stars and spaces and axes. But I think that is all that I want to say. So yeah, it's all been centered already. Like, you've got a coordinate. It's your job to do something with that coordinate now. Figure out the right thing that needs to be printed. So it's just a big long if-else if kind of thing. But it will take some thought. All right, but it's very pretty. It's super satisfying to get it working, especially like the sine graph. I love it. So yeah, just compile it and run it as usual. It's just, you've made pictures now. It's really, really cool. All right, so I'm excited for you to get that working. Please ask me lots of questions if you have any. And I think that's all that I wanted to say. So you're going to have those two pieces of code all working perfectly by the due date, right? And then you'll turn them both in using the turn in command. I would say that the graphing calculator program is a little bit more complicated, and so I'm going to give it a little bit more credit. Okay? But I think that's all that I have to say about Lab 3. Do keep track of the due date, start early, ask lots of questions, and I will see you in the next one.